Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 161. So I got a lot of nice feedback about the mini episode we did last week. My intention moving forward is to go back to our weekly format, and when we have time to do a longer show, a deeper dive, and a delve into a topic like we're going to do today, I will do that. When I have less time, we will do a short 20-minute mini episode. Next week, I am anticipating a mini episode and we're going to talk about energetic hygiene, which is something we could absolutely do an entire show on. But one of the nice things about the mini format is sometimes receiving information in smaller bite-sized portions is a little bit easier to absorb, to digest, and to integrate. So I'm excited about continuing that format moving forward. As always, if you are enjoying the show, there are multiple ways you can support this work. You can always book with me one-on-one. Go to paulataylorenergy.com, check out my upcoming classes and events. I usually have in-person and online offerings. I also see people in person as well as online one-on-one. You can support the show by following the podcast, rating the podcast, sharing it with friends and family, watching and commenting on the Facebook videos, as well as donating to support the show through the podcast notes, or you can go to paulataylorenergy.com, go to the podcast tab, and there is a link to donate through PayPal. So today we are going to talk about riding the wave of grief. And it's no accident that grief has come up periodically over the almost 4 years now that we've been doing this show, because grief does come in waves. We've talked about that before. And the wave metaphor works really well for grief in a lot of ways. Sometimes when we're in acute grief, it feels like the waves are just pummeling us. It's like I lived in Hawaii for about 5 months a long time ago, and I got a lot of experience around waves and boogie boarding with waves. I never really got into surfing, watching waves. And we were there in the winter. There were a lot of storms, huge waves, just set after set after set of these giant waves. That's what acute grief often feels like we're just being completely pummeled. But no matter how long, no matter how far away we get time-wise, how much time passes, there we go, that's the phrase I was looking for. No matter how much time passes from whatever has caused us grief, these sets of waves will pretty much always come in at a certain point, and sometimes they're gentle, and sometimes it feels like a giant tsunami hit you and you're not sure, like came out of nowhere, which is a little bit what happened to me in Bali. We're going to talk about that more. One of the other things I want to say about grief is that I believe that grief is cumulative. So just like if you were taking a class and you're studying things all semester, and then at the end of the year, the professor or teacher says to you, all right, this final is cumulative. Every single thing you've learned this semester or this year is going to be on this final exam. It's a little bit how grief is. Every single person on earth will be in grief at some point. That is the nature of being human. We go through loss. We have mortal lives, so we lose people we love, we lose animals we love, we lose situations we love, jobs we love, houses we love, places to live. We can have grief about almost anything. And especially when it comes to losing a person or a being that you really love. Animals, I count in my mind kind of as people, but we can call them beings. That loss is cumulative. So you lose someone and then maybe you lose someone else, and it brings up all the feelings around the previous losses that we've had. So I'm going to tell you a story about how I was riding the wave of grief when I was in Bali. I've talked a lot about my dad on the show, and fairly recently I did a whole episode. I talked about what's the deal with ancestral healing. I talked about some ancestral healing I've been working on with my dad. And I was in this really incredible breathwork session where it felt like he was lying on the bed next to me, like I could actually touch him. That's how close he was. He passed away in 2017, so it's been 7 years now. And in some ways, I've felt like we're closer now than we were when he was alive. He communicates with me regularly. He shows up for things, sometimes in a humorous way, sometimes a lot of times as kind of a protector. When I had my massive surgery at the end of 2022, he absolutely went into the operating room with me. I could feel him there. I could feel him in my room while I was sleeping. Could feel my dog Emmett, who had passed, like almost physically again. I could feel him lying next to me in bed. Pretty incredible. The experiences we can have even after someone has transitioned out of this physical plane. Also, a little bit of a disclaimer. I can almost guarantee I'm going to get emotional on this show because we're talking about grief, and I want you to know it's okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to express your grief. And in fact, the way that we allow grief to move through us is by riding the wave of grief. You cannot stop a wave. It's not happening. The force of that water is going to come at you whether you're ready for it or not, whether you ride it or not. I spent a lot of time boogie boarding in my time in Hawaii, and there were multiple times when I thought maybe I was going to die because I misjudged the wave or something happened. I didn't dive under it in time, and you get kind of pummeled, and people do get seriously injured. People get hurt and sometimes even killed by the power of waves. That is how grief works. It comes in waves. If you can allow yourself to ride the wave of grief, to allow the grief to flow, working with the water rather than fighting against it, that's kind of the idea of riding a wave, right? We wait for the wave to come. We time it so that we catch it, whether you're body surfing or boogie boarding or surfing, and then you ride it down until it subsides and it's safe. One of the dangers in Hawaii was that there were these huge waves and you had to get to the point where you were past the wave so you could catch it, diving under the wave, jumping over the wave, kind of judging. How do I work with this wave? I'm gonna get away from this metaphor just a little bit because we could go like really far down that path. But I just want to introduce this as almost like a visceral sensation of this idea of grief sort of coming at you and you having a decision. How am I going to deal with this? Grief feels very heavy. It can feel very dark and very lonely because a lot of times when we're in grief, other people just can't understand the depth of the grief we're in because they're not in the same grief with us at the same time. Everybody on earth will have grief. Everybody grieves differently. Everybody grieves about different things. So one of the things that happens is that grief can feel really lonely. It can be really isolating. People have a hard time holding space for grief. We've talked about that before. There's a whole article on my website. One of my earliest blog posts was called Holding Space for Grief, where I talked about my experiences with grief around my recurrent pregnancy loss. So 12 miscarriages, lots and lots and lots of grief there. And that's when I learned how to ride the wave of grief because it almost killed me. There was a point at which I didn't want to live anymore. I just couldn't. I lost faith and I couldn't carry the weight of that grief anymore. And one of the things that was gifted to me was the understanding through the process I call dissipation through expansion. I write about in my book, and there's some meditations on that you can work with as well. We cannot run from feelings. They're scary, they're uncomfortable, they can be heavy, and especially grief. When we try to run from them, we prolong them. When we allow the feeling to come up, when we ride the wave of the emotion, and this goes for all emotions, not just grief, when we ride the wave of the emotion, it's uncomfortable, it's intense. When that huge 8-foot wave is coming at you and you're trying to catch it with your boogie board and you're not quite sure if your timing is going to be right, are you going to crash and burn? Are you going to ride it to the shore? There's some faith involved in allowing your emotion to get large. But the larger you can allow it to get, that is what emotions are meant to do. They're meant to be felt and expressed and then released. So that's that wave. So what I learned riding these multiple waves of grief when I was losing pregnancy after pregnancy after pregnancy was not to try to, I can't stop the wave. The wave is coming. So I might as well ride the wave. And I found tools for myself to allow myself to express the grief, to be in the grief, and then to move forward, to allow the wave to hit the shore, and then to kind of get up and keep walking until the next wave came in. So in 2017, we lost my dad. I've talked about that multiple times on the show. If you want to know more about the recent things that have been happening, you can go back and listen to the What's the Deal with Ancestral Healing show. I'm not sure why it was so surprising to me that he was very strongly present with me on this recent trip to Bali. So I was invited at the very last minute. I had this opportunity to go to this amazing retreat in Bali with Liz Zamorsky, the Femme Genius. And from the moment I got on the plane, like my dad, it was like he was like really with me. And it was very comforting because he has been around as a protector for me. And we've, again, our relationship has developed to the point where I feel closer to him in death than I maybe did in life. There's something freeing about being released from your physical body that sometimes allows you to kind of look at the emotions that you weren't able to see when you were alive, when you were kind of in the restriction of having a physical body. So I knew my dad was there. He's been around a lot, so it didn't particularly surprise me. I will tell you what really surprised me, and I almost entitled this episode, I can't remember exactly what it was, but essentially, like, this idea that grief comes in waves. Sometimes you're not expecting it. And I felt like I was losing him all over again. That's where this story is going. So let me just get into the story. So I've talked about this on a couple previous episodes. You don't need to know all the details, but the first full day at this retreat, we were going to do a water purification ritual at this temple. And I woke up in the middle of the night before, and my dad was like right there. And he was warning me about some things. There were multiple things going on. There was a lot of energy there. It's a volatile place energetically. Bali has a volcanic energy that reminds me of Hawaii. This kind of really intense, sort of lively energy that can feel a little bit coming from this smooth kind of old energy of the desert into that volcanic intensity is a lot. And then there were these women here, and we were all here with this common purpose. So there was a lot of energy moving around. And I woke up and I was having a lot of information come in about not doing this ritual and feeling like I wasn't meant to be in that space. But one of the things that came through that completely knocked me over, the tsunami of grief that knocked me over, was that my dad told me, I want you to release me. I want you to leave me here in Bali. I want you to let me go. And it really did feel like I was losing him all over again. And I wasn't really sure why he was asking me. So there was some hurt there around this feeling of kind of having him really close and developing our relationship and working on this ancestral healing for his side of the family that we've been working on together. And so there's a little bit of a feeling of abandonment, like, I don't understand, we've been working on this stuff. And it was kind of like, well, that was the thing we needed to finish together, and now I need to move on to what's next. And it was really, again, it felt like a tsunami of grief. It was probably the most intense and heaviest grief I've had in the last few years about him, absolutely. And let me be clear, when he was telling me to release him, it doesn't mean that he's no longer in existence. It doesn't mean that I can't access him if I'd like to. But he's been very close to me, especially in the last probably 2 years, right around when I had that surgery until now. And so there was a lot of, again, it was like grieving all over again. It was like losing him all over again. It was like being right back in the decision at the hospital to allow him to go into hospice and kind of waiting for him to leave when we were in hospice. We went to this water temple. There's a whole long story about that I'm not going to go back into. But I talked about being triggered in that situation. I was triggered by some things that were going on in the environment, by some of the sensitivities I have, but I was also triggered by this grief, because what came through was that my dad wanted me to leave him at this temple, to kind of do this ritual of release and leave him there. And I didn't want to do it. I wasn't ready to do it at that time. And so I was putting some pressure on myself around doing this practice, around getting into this because I was like, he wants me to do this and I need to do this here. And part of the realization I had was it doesn't matter where I do this ritual. The important thing is that I honor his wishes and that I do this release that he's asking me to do. But again, it was so intensely, viscerally saying goodbye to him all over again. I think that's the episode title I was trying to think of, was Grief Saying Goodbye All Over Again, because that is what it feels like. Every time this wave comes in, it sometimes feels like we have to let go of this person, being that we loved all over again. It's not enough to do it once. It's like this constant practice of surrender and letting go. That is what riding the wave of grief is. And so I allowed myself to grieve. I allowed myself to express what was going on to some of the other women who were there. I allowed myself to talk about how close he's been and this amazing work that we've done, healing this really intense ancestral block that was in this line that was hurting me, all of the descendants of this line, people who were no longer in a physical body, people who are alive, people who are still to come. And so what came through from him was this idea that, and I think this might be universal, so I'm going to share it. And I think when I say universal, this is a shared experience that other people have. Not everybody goes this route. I have seen a lot of evidence of what happens after we die. People come in to see me all the time, and loved ones will come in and ancestors will come in. And it's always interesting to me, the common themes, but the completely different stories, the completely different experiences. I know somebody who lost someone very close to them, and this person communicated to me that they have moved on to essentially a job in the sort of celestial realm, creating the architecture that holds the soul in the physical body. There are people that stay around and essentially act almost like as guardians or guardian angels for the people that they leave behind. There are multiple, just like there are infinite ways to serve in this physical realm, there are infinite ways to serve once we pass beyond this. So what I'm sharing with you may be an experience that a loved one that you have lost has had. It may be completely foreign because they've had a completely different kind of experience. But one of the things that I've seen fairly commonly is this idea that when we leave our physical body, we do some work around releasing the things that we did in that life that we have regrets about, that maybe we're not proud of, what some people might call karmic work, karmic release. So what came to me was that my dad has been sticking close to me because he wanted to essentially kind of atone for the things that he did when he was alive that he wasn't proud of, that the ways that he felt like he failed me, the ways that he felt like he hadn't treated me in the way he really wanted to. And so part of that has been this kind of repairing of our personal relationship and understanding kind of where he was coming from as a person and the things he was dealing with that led into this kind of big ancestral healing work that we essentially did together. And so what he told me was that he's done the work that he needed to do to repair our relationship, to essentially clear the karma, to make up for the things that he felt like were unresolved, that needed to be finished. And it was time for him to move on to what was next. And I have a lot of feelings about that. I have mixed feelings about that. I have joy about the fact that he was able to do that, that he's able to move on to what's next for him, that he's been able to clear what he needed to clear so that he can move on to what he's meant to do next. And then I have sorrow and sadness and grief about letting him go to do what he's meant to do next, because it's been really nice to have him so close and so accessible to me. But I also recognize that part of our service to each other, whether we're alive or not, is to allow space for people to grow. And so in order to allow space for him to grow, I had to let him go. And so I did that when I was in Bali, and it was really difficult. Again, it felt like losing him all over again. And so I rode that wave of grief that kind of crested really shortly after we arrived, and then I rode it kind of through the rest of the trip as it kind of came up. But what I am here to tell you is that just like riding a wave in physical reality, the wave will always resolve. If you stand up and you say no to the wave, not only is that wave going to hit you, the next wave's going to hit you, the next wave's going to hit you, the next wave's going to hit you. If you've ever been at the beach or watched video of people, trying to get out kind of past where the waves break, there's this really awkward place where like you're just getting pummeled over and over again, and you've got to get out past that if you're going to, kind of body surf or whatever it is you're wanting to do, or even you just want to kind of swim where the water's calmer. If you try to stop grief from coming through, you will just keep getting pummeled by it. If you allow yourself to ride the wave, however scary the wave is, it might look like one of those 30-foot North Hawaii waves that only crazy people ride and ride successfully and amazingly, that might be the feeling you have. There's no way I will survive this. But if you allow yourself to ride the wave, eventually that crest of the wave resolves and it will place you back on the sand. And that is the experience that I had in Bali, of being really, really, really strongly in grief, kind of feeling a little bit like this tsunami came and knocked like out of nowhere. There was no tsunami warning alarm. There was no earthquake trigger. It was just like, he was like, all right, it's time to release me and you're going to do it today. And I allowed myself to experience the feelings that came up. I allowed myself to experience that sadness. I allowed myself to express that sadness through crying and talking about it. And that is how we ride the wave of grief, by allowing the feelings to come through. Sharing your feelings can be really helpful. We had a really deep discussion and sharing around grief in this, what I was calling the red tent, this kind of van that a few of us ended up in that didn't participate in this water purification ritual. And allowing yourself to be seen and heard. It's a little bit like the little guy on the jet ski, if you've ever watched those crazy giant wave surfing events. There's like a little guy on a jet ski out there that's there to kind of pull you back into shore. Having support around your grief is like having that little guy in the jet ski. And support can come from other people. Support can come from allowing yourself the space to express. I got a lot of support from my beagle Henry when I was dealing with the grief around my recurrent pregnancy loss. Just having someone be in the space with you, having someone hold space for you in a way where they're not expecting you to do something. And that's one of the things that came up in this ritual when I came back to the van, and I was kind of in a panic and I was hyperventilating and I was crying, and I said, my dad wanted me to release him and I couldn't do it. But almost right away I realized, and it was reflected back in such a loving way from these other women, Like, it doesn't have to be this specific thing. You don't have to do it at this particular place and this particular time. If you need to do a water purification ritual, you can do your own ritual. And I did at the very end of the trip. There was a bridge. So there was a pool with kind of a fire pit in it. Very cool. You can see the pictures if you go to my social media accounts, Paula Taylor Energy, Instagram. There's some on TikTok and on Facebook. And then there was a bridge from the fire pit to onto the sidewalk. And it was interesting because I was hanging around in the pool one day, and I realized that there was actually space under the bridge. Like, you could swim under the bridge. It wasn't, I thought it had been solid, and I actually went to put my feet on it, and they kind of went under the bridge, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. And so it came to me that I could do a water release ritual all by myself. No one needed to be there. No one needed to say anything. No one needed to even know what I was doing. And I could release not just him, but all of the things that I set out to release, that I was ready to let go of. I swam ceremonially under that bridge, and that was my release ceremony. And that's an important note about ritual. Ritual is another great way to help us move through emotions, not just grief, all emotions. And sometimes we tend to get really complicated with our rituals. We tend to get kind of obsessed about the ritual itself rather than focusing on the intention of a ritual. A ritual can be extremely simple as long as it's meaningful, and it needs to be meaningful to you. So, for example, I grew up in the Catholic Church. There's a lot of ritual in the Catholic Church. I did not resonate with that ritual to the point that I thought I hated ritual for years and years and years and years, because that specific ritual did not align with my system. The vibration was not in resonance with me. But I use ritual very frequently. We're going to talk a little bit about energetic hygiene next episode. That's a great place to incorporate ritual. And again, ritual doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be something that a lot of people participate in. It just has to be meaningful to you, and it has to be done with intention. So I created this release ritual for myself where I kind of went through all of the things that I wanted to release, including allowing my dad to be free, letting him go so he didn't have to be so closely tethered to me. And I thought about this on and off throughout this retreat I was on. It came up, many other things came up, but as I was kind of cresting down from the height of that wave and having some emotion come up and just allowing it to express, I began to think about how I wanted to do this ritual. And that's what came to me. Extremely simple. If anybody had been watching me, just looked like I stood there and then swam underneath the bridge and came up the other side. But for me, it was extremely meaningful. It was a symbol of my willingness to let things go, and specifically to let my dad go, to let him move on to where he was meant to go next. And of course, I didn't know where he was meant to go next. He may not have known. Like I said, I've worked with people. Sometimes people end up getting born again and they, reincarnate into a completely different life. Sometimes people go work in the spiritual realm doing something else. So I didn't know if he would really still be accessible to me. And that was really hard. That was part of the feeling of like losing him all over again. Was like right now, or if, in the past, I could just like kind of snap my fingers and he would be there. And other people have commented on it. Just yesterday, somebody was telling me, your dad likes to stand right here in this space, in my business space, that my dad kind of hangs out in this one space. And other people have said that when they come to my house, I had someone come and say, there's a man standing there. And I said, oh, that's probably my dad. That's where I have his ashes. And he's probably kind of hanging out there. Again, kind of playing this protector role. And, it turns out he didn't go all that far. So it makes me feel good to know that he's serving where he needs to serve next. and that I still get to feel his presence. We never end. So no matter how far away someone goes, if you're sensitive, you have a link to that person, especially someone that really is meaningful to you, that you have a really beautiful, strong, energetic cord with. You can trace that cord and find them wherever they are. But kind of like if you have people on the other side of the world, you don't see them that often. You don't talk to them as often as, someone you maybe see every day. It feels like they're more distant. And that's kind of how that goes. And my dad has left before to work on things and then kind of come back. And I could always kind of find him. And that's sort of what I assumed he was like leaving somewhere where he would be way up in the spiritual realm. But he's still really close, and it makes me very happy to have released him into the service that he was meant to do next, so that he can have the freedom to continue to work through, to clear whatever he feels like he needs to let go of in that kind of karmic realm, so that he can ultimately move on to what is next for him on a deeper spiritual level. The last thing I'll say about this, and I talked about this in a show a while ago, one of the gifts my dad gave me was he allowed me to see what it looked like when he died. Like when he transitioned out of his body, he let me see what was there to greet him. And then by extension, I was allowed to see kind of what will be there to greet me. And there's no guarantees in this life. There's nobody who can tell you 100%. But as confident as I can be in saying this, I will tell you that you will see your loved ones again. I have seen them, and when people die, a lot of times, almost always in my experience, they are greeted by maybe a single loved one who takes them, but the vision that I got was his mother, who I never got to meet because she died when he was 17. She met him at these things that looked really remarkably like what people would call pearly gates. And I was like, oh, that's where this like idea comes from. They were not something that you could really describe in the physical realm, but the closest idea was these kind of like pearly gate-ish things in like this cloudy, sort of heavenly cloud area. So he was greeted by her, and she walked him through these gates, this portal, and the whole rest of his family was there. All of the ancestors who came before him, probably physical and energetic lineage ancestors, and then this legion of celestial beings, angels, archangels, whatever word you want to use for that. And they were so thrilled to see him. There was such a celebration. It was like the ultimate welcome home party, the ultimate reception of coming home. And he showed that to me because he wanted me to release the fear I had left around dying. I don't have a lot of fear around it, but there's always been a little bit of like, ugh, what happens, and are you still you, and all of this kind of thing. And so one of the things that really helps me with grief is just knowing that I will see those that I've lost again. I will be able to experience being close to them in a way that feels more tangible than it might when we're separated through these differentiations of me being in a denser plane and having a physical body, and them being more in a spiritual realm. Whew. So for today's meditation, we're going to work a little bit on finding grief in our body. So in the Chinese medicine, in traditional Chinese medicine, grief is associated with the lungs, and that very much tends to be where grief lives for most of us, somewhere in the chest. A lot of us also feel kind of emotional pain in the belly, but grief, to me, generally, it feels kind of like this weight and a little bit of a constriction of the chest. And it's probably, we're also in spring, so it's always interesting to me how like the physical and the energetic lines up. So I've been dealing with kind of letting go of some of this grief, and I've also been dealing with some kind of heaviness and tightness in my lungs and in my chest and my heart chakra area. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise today just to kind of find this grief that's most likely kind of living in the chest. And again, every single person who lives on earth will experience grief at some point. If you haven't, it might just be because you haven't been in touch with it. Because again, we grieve about things other than death. We grieve about changes in situations. We grieve about the loss of friendships. We grieve about losing tangible objects sometimes, like moving to a different place, a friend moving away. There is grief in your body to be found. If today is not the day to explore that, that's completely fine. Then maybe come back and do this meditation another day. If you want to do some of this exploration, we're going to do it in a safe and supportive way. Grief is one of those things that oftentimes you will need support moving through that. You will need someone to help you hold space. So a mental health professional, somebody who does somatic body work, a friend, a coach, someone who can listen and hold space for you. I am going to purposely guide you in a way that we're not going to get into this sort of deepest, heaviest weight of grief. Choose not to go there today. You can do that another time. You can work up to that slowly. But if you want to go into the really kind of heaviest parts of grief, I suggest doing that with help. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. So let's meditate together. For this meditation, you will want to be as comfortable, as cozy, as supported as you can. But I also recommend finding a position where you have access to put your hands on your chest, on your heart space. So if you can do that lying down and that feels comfortable, then go ahead and lie down. If it's a little more accessible to do that from a seated position, just make sure you're seated in a way that's really supported. Have your feet on the ground, have your back up against something, maybe get a cozy blanket. You want to feel really cozy and supported for this exploration of grief in the physical body. Before we even get into our breathing, I want you to place your hands on your chest and just notice how it feels. Let go of any judgments. We're not even looking specifically for grief now. We're just noticing, how does your chest feel today? My chest feels a little bit tight, feels a little bit maybe dry and congested. It's allergy season, but I've also been dealing with grief, and I recognize a little bit of a feeling of kind of constriction or restriction, a little bit of a fist at the center of my chest. So just get some descriptive words to notice how you're feeling in your chest. And it does help to put your hands there a lot of times. If that's not comfortable or not accessible, of course, you can just leave your hands where they're comfortable. And then once you've kind of taken the measure of that, just allow your hands to relax for a moment. Let's do 3 to 5 deep oxytocin breaths together. We're going to breathe through the nose, let the belly float out strongly. We're going to sigh that breath out through the mouth using an audible ha sound, vibrating the nerves that in turn vibrate the vagus nerve, telling the body that it's safe, that it's okay to relax, to rest and digest here. So as you're ready, I'll do the first one with you. Allow that breath to float in through the nose. Do that at least 2 to 5 more times. Just noticing how your body feels, allowing some heaviness and relaxation to come into the body. Feeling your connection with the earth as you breathe here. Especially as you breathe out, you might just set the intention to send your energy down into the earth. Beautiful support for all of our emotional waves can be had by connecting to the earth. And we're going to do one more of those deep oxytocin breaths together. This time, again, put your hands on your chest. Just notice the sensations in your chest. Maybe there's been a little bit of a shift since you started breathing, maybe not. Either one is fine. And we're going to set the intention with this breath to just surrender. Just think about surrendering anything that's not serving you as you complete this last oxytocin breath with me. And then you can allow your hands to relax again, or you can leave them on the chest, whatever feels good. What we're going to do now is just notice where you're holding grief in your body. You might start with your hands off the chest because maybe you're not holding grief in your chest. There's no rules about where emotions are held. You could be holding it anywhere. So perhaps allow your hands to relax and then just ask the question, where am I holding grief in my body? And just see what comes up. Interestingly, the first thing that came to me was in my hips. And we can hold emotions and do hold emotions in multiple places at one time. So for this meditation, just pick maybe the first thing that came to your mind, maybe whatever came through most strongly. If nothing came through, it's not a bad idea to focus on the heart space, on the chest. That does tend to be where a lot of our hurt resides, and grief is absolutely hurt. That pain of losing someone, losing a being that you loved very dearly. So place one hand on your chest, or maybe both, and then if there was another area that was calling to you that's accessible, you might place your hands there. You might find that it's not accessible, it's not easy to reach. So you can always also just direct the palm of your hand in the direction of where this area is calling for attention. So if it was my feet, I might just point my palm down at my feet. If it's my head and I don't want to hold my hand up on my head, I might just point my palm at my head. You want to be relaxed in this posture. You don't want to be straining your muscles to reach these areas. So with one hand on your chest and one hand directed at any other areas of grief in the body, they might both be on the chest. Start to get some descriptive words for what does this grief feel like in my body. What are the sensations here? Maybe there's a color or a texture associated with this. Maybe you're getting images. Maybe you just feel the physical sensation of tightness or heaviness, constriction. Just see what comes through. What is the feeling of grief? What does it feel like in my physical body? How am I experiencing this emotion that's held in my physical body? What is the sensation? And I'm going to assist you through this transmission with some Reiki. But know that you don't need to be Reiki attuned to send energy to yourself and others. Energy naturally wants to channel through our body. So we're going to spend a moment opening our channel, and then we're just simply going to hold our hands in this area and send loving energy to this space that's holding grief in the body. So keep your hands where they are, but just imagine, as we often do, the top of your head, your crown chakra opening. You can see it opening like the petals of a flower, or imagine turning a faucet on, and draw in that beautiful, unconditional love that is the source of all that exists. Let it flow in through the top of your head. Let it fill your head. Let it fill your face. Let it fill your jaw and your throat. Let it fill your neck. Let this beautiful, unconditional, loving energy flow out into your shoulders, down into the elbows, through your forearms, wrists, and hands. You might notice your hands heating up as you direct this beautiful energy to the grief that's held in your body. Continue to allow this energy to flow into your chest and your upper back. Let it come down into your belly and your low back, into your hips and your pelvis, down into each thigh. Let this beautiful unconditional love flow into your knees, down through your lower legs, into your ankles and feet. And then come back once more and call this energy in through the top of your head. Let it come through your face. Let it come through your throat. Let it come down each arm through your hands. Let it come into your chest. And especially now focus on allowing this energy to flow through your hands. This is Reiki. This is universal life force energy flowing through this unconditional love and light that is the source of our being. Direct it now at these areas of grief in your body. And know that if emotions come up, it's okay. Allow yourself to release those. Allow yourself to stay just at about the 10 to 20% range of depth here. What I mean by that is maybe your grief occupies 100%. We're going to go just about 10% into this. We're just doing some gentle work today. You can come back and repeat this. And each time you work on this, you might allow this wave of grief to move through you more fully. But there's no need to do this in one sitting. We're not going to ever get rid of grief. We're not meant to never have it again. It's an emotion that will continue to come up for us. What we're looking for here is just to allow this crest of this wave of grief to subside a little bit. So you're looking for a small wave of grief here. And there might be larger waves to be ridden, but today is not the day for that. Today's a day to just do a little bit of exploring, finding these waves, finding where this is held in the physical body. We're bringing some movement. Grief tends to be heavy. It tends to be stagnant. That's why it can feel hard to get up out of bed. When we're feeling that grief so intensely, we don't want to move. We don't want to move on with our lives. It feels like nothing will ever be the same again. So we're just bringing some movement into this denseness, into this heaviness. Again, knowing you can come back to this, knowing you can reach out for help to explore this a little more deeply. Just directing this beautiful, loving energy into the areas of grief in your body. Continue to do this. We're going to step into a little bit of sound. I'm assisting you with Reiki as well, is to help this beautiful love come into these spaces. Allowing ourselves to ride this wave of grief. Allowing ourselves to be present with this discomfort, with this pain, knowing that as we bring movement, as we allow it to express and move through, it will subside, even if it's just for a short period of time. Once the wave reaches the shore, it fades out before the next wave comes in. allowing yourself to be present here, present with this grief that was born of love. Loving something and losing it is one of the hardest experiences we have as human beings, but it happens to us over and over again. We can allow ourselves to surrender to that wave, to the grief. We can allow it to move through us. We can allow ourselves to bring in space for even more love and expansion, even knowing that loss is inevitable. We also feel at a deep level that it is so worth loving deeply the way that we do in these human bodies. Spend the last moment here setting the intention to wrap up this beautiful energy you've been sending to yourself, this energy that you've been receiving through this transmission. Take a beautiful deep oxytocin breath, let it out with an audible sigh. Beautiful way to move some of that emotional energy through the system, letting that wave reach the shore, giving yourself a break between waves. As you're ready, bring your hands together in prayer position. You can hold them at your heart space or down at the belly. We're just setting the intention to end this beautiful energetic session that we've shared with ourselves, with each other. This has been a collective practice, so everyone who listens to this transmission is sending energy not only to themselves, but to everyone else who participates. This beautiful shared experience of grief that we all share. Gently allow that crown chakra to close, or you can leave it open to about 40% capacity for your highest good. Take your hands and shake them a few times, just discharging any energy. You can rub them together a little bit, palms together, and then shake them a few more times. We're just letting go of any energy that's not serving, allowing ourselves to bring this self-healing session to a close. As you feel ready, you can relax your hands down. You can go ahead and shake a little bit more, add some shaking into the rest of the body, just a really good way to kind of bring yourself back from the space, release any of that emotion that came up that's ready to be moved through, any of that wave that's ready to continue cresting into the shore. Place your hands just briefly back on your heart space. Give yourself some gratitude for being present for yourself and the other people who are participating in this practice with you. Take one more nice deep breath, sigh it out. The truth of your identity is that you are having a human experience, and that does involve grief, but you can allow grief to move through you. You can ride that wave of grief and make way for even more love and expansion in your life. You can continue to connect with those you've lost in a loving way, knowing that they have moved on to do what is in their best interest, what's next for them. Send them some love. Send yourself some love. as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be gentle with yourself the rest of today or this evening. Drink a lot of water. You might find you want to do a little bit of journaling. You might find you want to do a little bit of a ritual. However that calls to you, to honor this grief practice, a little bit of release. You might find that you want to come back to this and know that you can. Know that there are people out here like me who can help you process and move through grief. It is a universal experience. And at the root of grief is love. We are beings of love. Have a loving rest of your day or evening. And I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesdays.